Bonjour. Je m'appelle Holly et j'habite dans une petite ville qui s'appelle Totnes, dans le sud-ouest d'Angleterre. Malheureusement, mon français est trop mal pour continuer en français.
So her French isn't good enough. We're going to try to do this in French. In English.
We're supposed to have a tradition from English to French.
Mais c'est un honneur à parler à vous. So Totnes is where the transition movement started.
C'est là que le mouvement de transition a démarré.
This is an environmental movement that, unlike
mouvement
other environmental movements, engages people by encouraging them to do things to improve their lives and not make them more miserable.
L'objectif est de faire en sorte que les gens se mobilisent par eux-mêmes.
And I'm going to show you several slides and a short film to illustrate how this movement that started in Totnes but has now grown worldwide goes about this.
Pour vous montrer comment ce mouvement est devenu un mouvement mondial.
So Totnes is, as I said, in the southwest.
Totnes, comme je l'ai dit, est sur le sud-ouest.
It's at the top of the River Dart.
C'est en haut de la rivière Dart.
And it's a small market town.
C'est un petit marché, un petit village.
And in relation to France,
en relation avec la France,
you can see it's, I can't point, but it's
difficile à
it's between Exeter and Plymouth.
C'est entre Exeter et Plymouth.
The green
Là où vous voyez le vert,
dot is Dartmoor National Park.
C'est Dartmoor National Park. C'est un parc national.
Just to give you some context.
Là où nous sommes situés.
So this is it's a very picturesque town, and you can see the Normandy castle and church in this shot.
L'église, le château.
So the movement started in 2006 when Rob Hopkins moved to Totnes. And he was concerned about the twin threats to society of peak oil and climate change.
Il avait peur, il était inquiet par les problèmes de gaz.
And that cheap energy was fueling everything, and that this couldn't continue.
Et que l'énergie pas chère
and
était
that climate change was having a detrimental effect on our communities, our food prices, fuel prices, and access to services. Shall I try again?
Yeah.
So the concern was that this cheap energy was creating detrimental effect on communities.
C'est un problème sur toute la communauté et l'environnement.
With rising food prices,
avec les coûts de nourriture qui augmentaient,
fuel prices and access to services.
Le pétrole, les accès aux services.
There was also a feeling that this cheap energy, which has brought amazing advances in medicine,
c'est que cette énergie peu chère crée des avances.
has led to our communities fragmenting, people working further away, longer days, and with more pressure.
Des gens qui étaient divisés, du coup, à travailler plus longtemps, plus loin, de façon plus disparate.
And the loss of skills which are useful and enjoyable, such as cooking and gardening.
Ainsi que le manque de compétences, d'activités pour tout ce qui était le jardinage, la cuisine.
And it has resulted in people moving away from trusting each other and to becoming more and more isolated.
Et finalement, des gens ont arrêté de se faire confiance entre eux et de se faire entre eux.
Are we okay up there?
Yep, we're fine, thank you.
In the face of this, the question was posed, as to what we could do as a
La
community,
question a été posée, qu'est-ce que nous pouvons faire en tant que communauté?
as to what we could do as a community to reduce our energy use
Qu'est-ce que nous pouvons faire pour réduire nos consommations d'énergie
and to increase our resilience against these
et
threats.
de se renforcer en face de cette menace?
So what I'd like to do just now is show you a short clip of a video.
Alors, ce que j'aimerais vous faire montrer, c'est un petit clip.
And it's a video called Transition 2.0, and it looks at transition projects around the
C'est
world.
une vidéo qui s'appelle Transition 2.0 et ça parle des projets de transition partout dans le monde.
And just gives you a broad background as to what the overall transition aim is.
Ce sera un résumé pour vous expliquer quels sont les objectifs de cette initiative.
And then I will spend some time looking at some key projects that we have initiated in
Ensuite, je vais vous
Totnes.
montrer certains projets clés sur lesquels nous nous sommes concentrés.
Can you just do a quick raise of hands as to how many of you here are involved in a
Levez les
transition
mains,
project?
qui est impliqué dans le projet de transition? Levez les mains. Can you say again, please?
Okay. Okay. No, there's a few.
Oh, il y en a pas mal.
Transition stimulates creative juices of people on the street to get them together beyond their differences, to make best use of their resources, their energies, their spirits.
It's not about trying to change behaviour, it's about setting in place structures which can be available when needed, when there's the perceived need for them, they're there.
For me, transition is moving towards an economy where everyone has a value, everyone has a place, and everyone has a purpose, and that includes the environment having a purpose, but also people.
For me, as transition is more engaging with your community, building your community, and helping your community.
Everybody cares about their community, so everybody has something to offer, and I love that inclusivity about it. So to me, that's what transition is about.
So transition for me is imagining what our community looks like 20, 30, 50 years into the future, where we've done a really good job of creating something that's inclusive, that is thriving, where people are happy and our way of living is sustainable, and then figuring out today what we can do to help us get there.
Humans have been going, oh, what's this stuff? Oil. We just found it. Oh, this can be quite useful. And so they started using it more. And then, oh, this is really useful. So they started using it even more. And we're increasing the levels that we use oil. And meanwhile, the levels of oil left are rapidly decreasing. And so that is causing a big problem. All the greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, that are released when we're burning it, go up into the air. It captures the heat from the sun, keeps it in, stops it from getting back out, bounces it back in, boom, 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 and it will actually heat up the earth, which will cause unstable weather. There's a general rising in temperature, the poles will start to melt, so the sea levels will rise, flood land, and it will generally cause climate chaos. Peak oil is also linked to another problem called economic crisis. Now, economic crisis is when the economy goes bust. So basically, for the economy to grow, first of all, you need consumers. Then you need stuff for the consumers to buy. The stuff is produced in factories, and the factories need cheap energy, such as oil. And when they don't get so much out of that cheap energy, because of the oil, the stuff becomes more expensive, so less consumers buy it, and the economy shrinks. What transition people would want is for us to have a sustainable economy instead of one that grows and shrinks like anything, because the economy that we have now, it could go boom at any moment and just disappear. But if we have a sustainable economy, it won't.
Okay, so that gives you a quick snapshot of what the thinking behind transition is. So transition has also been described as, because it's based on permaculture principles, as a revolution disguised as gardening. Which is a term I like. And the first project that I want to look at with you is the principles of permaculture are very heavily ingrained in this project. And I don't know how familiar you are with permaculture principles, but this slide very simply illustrates some of the core aspects of it. With care for the earth, care for people, and fair share at the core. So Transition Homes is a project that has been in the planning for 5 years. And essentially a group of people within the transition movement in Totnes have managed to secure a 6-acre piece of land just outside the town. And with the aim of building low impact, affordable houses for local people. And so these houses will demonstrate renewable energy, water conservation, the buildings will be built from local materials. We're encouraging people to share cars and reduce their car use. And throughout, the idea is that as much as possible, people will be involved in the training and can volunteer on the project. In order to be eligible for one of these houses, you will need to be able to demonstrate that you have lived in the area for the last 3 years, that you are in real housing need, which means you don't already own your own house, and that you are prepared to buy into the principles of low impact living. and so that you, for instance, you'd be prepared to use a compost toilet and to not put chemicals down your sink and so on. So the idea is that there will be communal aspects to the project. There'll be a communal orchard, there'll be communal growing spaces, and a communal building to bring people together, to share food together. Okay, and another project. Oh, and just to go back to this one. These permaculture aspects have been used in terms of looking at that piece of land. So before building anything on it, we've been looking at things like the aspects, the wind direction, and in order, and where water is, in order that piece of land is being used to maximize its potential. And where the project is currently is planning permission has been sought from the local council. And we are waiting to hear the outcome of this. Okay. So another very different project is the Reconomy project. And this is essentially looking at a new type of economy. It's a way of, instead of creating competition, at its heart it has collaboration. And there are three aspects to this work. The first is the local economic blueprint, which is a piece of research looking at the amount of money spent in the Totnes area and how much of that money leaves the area. And I'll talk more about this in terms of food shortly. Then we have the Reconomy Centre, which is a physical building where small up-and-coming enterprises can work from as a work centre. And bounce ideas around each other, so that small enterprises are not working in isolation. And the final is the Local Entrepreneur Forum, which again I'll talk about more. So in terms of what makes, when we're looking at a new kind of economy, what makes an enterprise a transition enterprise? What we have here is overlapping aspects of, that an enterprise would support the local community and build resilience in the local community. That it's an integral part of the community. That it's using resources that are respectful of the future, and that are sustainable in their use. That wherever possible, things are kept as locally as possible. And that money isn't the driving factor behind that business. And the term resilience is a word that is used increasingly within the wider conversations, but its popularity seems to have started with the transition movement, and one of the definitions of resilience is its bounce back ability, and I imagine there isn't a French word for this.
box, comme un ballon.
But essentially it means that when you drop something, how much will it bounce back?
Jusqu'à quel point ça rebondit.
So how resilient is it to shock?
Jusqu'à quel point c'est résilient au choc.
And it's a key element of building community in this new context, in this new language. Okay, so I mentioned the local economic blueprint, and this document was looking at food, renewable energy, and health in terms of money coming into the community and out of the community, and how much stayed local. And I will talk a bit more about that. The Economy Centre is this building here.
Ce bâtiment-ci.
And this was donated to. We hire this from the local
Nous avons
council.
loué ce bâtiment du conseil local.
And they've given this to us for free.
Ils nous ont donné gratuitement.
It was a building that was empty for 3 or 4 years,
3 4 ans.
and it's a council-owned building.
Et c'est un bâtiment dont le propriétaire c'est le conseil local.
But nobody was using it, and so
Personne s'en
eventually,
servait, et éventuellement,
after much negotiation, we
Après,
persuaded them that we could do something really useful for
de
it,
faire quelque chose d'utile de ce bâtiment.
and create a community resource.
Et une ressource pour la communauté.
And we have to convince them that we are doing
Donc, vous les
that.
convaincre.
So we monitor everybody who's using the centre,
Vérifions
and a number of workshops
le
and
nombre
so on that we
d'ateliers,
hold
etc.,
here.
que nous avons ici.
But essentially it is a meeting place and a resource for small scale
Un lieu de rencontre
enterprises.
pour des petites entreprises.
So yes, these are the key aspects to it.
Ce sont les
So
aspects clés.
it's a drop-in centre for
C'est un incubateur d'espace
some
partagé.
enterprises.
Et pour certaines
It's
entreprises.
There's hot desking where different people can just come and work,
Les personnes ont la possibilité de changer de lieu de travail.
and it's also a meeting space.
C'est un lieu de rencontre.
From here we run something called skill shares,
Nous organisons quelque chose qui s'appelle des skill share, partage de compétences.
and the idea of this is that we all, as members of our community, have
L'idée, c'est
skills
que
that we can
nous avons
offer other
tous,
people.
membres de la communauté, des compétences que nous pouvons proposer aux autres.
Whether that's baking bread or it's teaching IT skills or how to darn your woolly jumpers.
Ou comment faire la couture, etc.
There is something that we can all teach somebody
Nous
else,
avons tous quelque chose à apprendre aux autres.
and none of us have to be experts in anything in order to be able to do
Nous ne sommes
that.
pas obligés d'être experts pour ce faire.
So we run many skill shares from the Economy Centre.
Beaucoup de skill share dans ce bâtiment.
There's currently over 50 members using the centre,
Plus de 50 membres qui se servent de ce centre.
and as much as possible we encourage this
Ils encourageons le
gift
plus possible
economy
cette économie du don,
way of working, so that
cette façon de travailler.
not everybody pays to use this centre.
Tout le monde
Some
ne paye pas
people,
pour utiliser
not
ce centre.
everybody pays money. Some people pay their time
Certains
for
payent
cleaning,
leur temps, ou pour
or
faire du ménage.
if they have some skills that could help the
S'ils
centre.
ont certaines compétences
Then there are
qui pourraient
various
être
ways of
utiles pour le
trading
centre.
and bartering.
Il y a plein de façons différentes pour échanger, pour donner,
And again, this is a key aspect of transition.
pour répéter. C'est un aspect clé de cette transition.
The services do not need to be traded for money. There
Les
are other ways
services
of
ne
trading.
sont pas forcément échangés pour de l'argent. Il y a d'autres façons.
Okay, and then the third aspect to
Troisième aspect.
the Economy Centre is this annual event
C'est le développement
called the
annuel.
Local Entrepreneur
C'est
Forum.
le forum des entrepreneurs locaux.
And this is a really inspiring event that happens once a
L'événement
year.
inspire plein de gens qui est annuel.
And we invite enterprises
Nous
to
invitons les
come.
entreprises pour venir
And we also invite organizations that can perhaps support these enterprises.
Qui peuvent soutenir, donner du soutien à ces entreprises.
So that may be business mentoring, or maybe financial advice,
ou des conseils financiers,
or it may be hardcore cash.
ou de l'argent.
And there are a sequence of events that happen during the day, and the idea is that those who have needs write up what needs they have, and those that are able to offer something write up their offers. And then at the end of the day, hopefully we've got some marriages where those two things come together. And last year I presented at this event a new project which I shall talk more about. And the design of this is based on, I don't know if you have this TV program called Dragon's Den in France.
Vous avez une émission de télé qui s'appelle, could you repeat? I didn't hear the name.
Dragon's Den?
Dragon's Den.
Anyway, it's essentially young businesses pitching to a bunch of dragons. And they are then grilled by the dragons to see if their business is viable or not. But we do a much more friendly version at the Entrepreneur Forum. And the community are the dragons. So I presented my project, and then the community asked me questions about how this is happening. And I make a pitch of all of the things I would like support from the community. And this included money, but it also was business help and land. We can ask for whatever we want from the community. And there was myself and 4 other projects all pitching. And we had the most amazing response, where we were offered over £50,000 worth of money that day. And it's a little bit like an auction, and everybody gets carried away with the momentum of this event and are offering all sorts of things. So yeah, other things that we received was labour, training, trees, food, and hugs. And lots of cross-pollination between people and organisations. Okay, so another project which is a partnership of Transition Town Totnes and the Totnes Development Group. There is, in the centre of Totnes, there is an old 6-acre site that was owned by a milk bottling company. It was one of the last industries happening in Totnes. And the factory closed down about 6 years ago. Since which time we have been working to influence the company that owns this site and trying to encourage them that they should give this site to us. So for many years they thought we were crazy, and that they simply wanted to maximise the amount of money they could get from this site. But what they didn't realise was that it wasn't worth anything. Because this site is on a floodplain, the river runs just to the side of it.
fleuve qui coule juste à côté, c'est sur un point où il y a des inondations.
The land is contaminated.
La terre est contaminée.
And there is a listed building, which means that planning restrictions are very tight.
C'est-à-dire que les restrictions sont très exigeantes.
This chimney is the building that is listed.
C'est le bâtiment qui est protégé.
So the intention for this site was that, in the end, the company did agree that they would give it to us for £1 Totnes pound. We have our own currency in Totnes. So we traded this site for £1 Totnes pound.
On a échangé ce site pour une livre Totnes.
And the vision for the site is that it will provide an architecturally significant low carbon example of development.
Intéressant au niveau de l'architecture qui produit pas beaucoup de carbone.
And what we want to create is small business units.
Et nous aimerions passer de petites entreprises ici.
Live work units.
On appelle des unités de vie et de travail, des work units.
Shared food processing space.
Des lieux de transformation de nourriture partagée.
And to create a thriving community space.
Créer un espace pour la communauté qui est vivant.
All of this achieved using sustainable building materials.
Tout cela avec des matériaux de construction durables.
And engaging the local people and using their skills as much as possible.
Avec les personnes locales et en échangeant avec leurs compétences intéressantes.
So the way we're going about this is through a new piece of legislation that has come out.
Nous effectuons ce travail par le biais d'une nouvelle loi.
Which is called the Community Right to Build Order.
Ça s'appelle l'arrêté sur le droit des communautés de construire.
It's a new route to planning consent, where the community decide what gets developed within their neighbourhood.
Donc les communautés décident ce qui est développé, qui est construit chez eux.
If we're successful, this will be the first community right to build order that's carried out independently through a neighbourhood planning development.
Indépendamment.
So the way this community right to build works is that we have to get community buy-in to the project.
Obligés de chercher le financement de la communauté.
So we need to be able to demonstrate quality public consultation process.
Le processus de consultation communautaire.
And once this has been achieved, then it has to be approved by an independent examiner.
Par un examinateur externe.
To ensure that it meets certain standards.
Pour assurer que ça répond à certaines conditions.
And once it has met their approval, then a local referendum has to happen, where about 60-70% of the people have to agree with the plan. So at the moment we're undertaking a huge community consultation and trying to get as many people on board as possible. We're finding out from the people who know the building and have a historical attachment to it what their association is with the site. And we're carrying out various bits of research to find out the levels of contamination and what needs to be done with that site. So essentially the site is in 3 parts. The orange part has actually been sold to a developer who we're working closely with to ensure that they build to the standards that we aspire to. And then the small purple strip is the part that you've just seen in the photographs, and that's where we are initially putting our
Et
resources.
c'est là qu'on commence à mettre nos ressources.
And then the much larger blue area is
Ensuite, il y a
as yet unknown,
pour l'instant, on ne sait pas.
but we are hoping once we've developed the first part that we will actually purchase the rest of the site too.
Acheter le reste du site.
But we need to demonstrate to the authorities that we deliver on the first site before we can think about that one.
On termine notre projet sur la première partie avant d'avancer à cette dernière.
So yeah, there's lots and lots of possibility for this site. It's really exciting. It's the biggest project we've ever been engaged in. And I'll just read what it says on this slide. This could be a place where new enterprises are cultivated, bread is baked, renewable energy is generated, the site's heritage is celebrated, beer is brewed, public events take place, businesses can grow, low carbon building can be seen in practice.
Pour mettre en pratique la construction à faible production de carbone.
A transport hub provides more sustainable travel options.
Ou un réseau de transport public peut donner plus d'options pour un mode de voyage plus durable.
And people can see, taste and live a sustainable economy in practice.
Et où tout le monde peut voir, goûter et vivre une économie durable en pratique.
So, no small ambition.
Ce n'est pas une toute petite ambition.
Okay, moving on to a much more localized project.
Local.
Transition Streets.
Transition Streets, la transition.
So Transition Streets was one of the very first Transition Town Totnes projects.
Premier projet de Totnes sur la transition.
And it starts very simply with just an individual on a street
Avec un particulier, une personne dans la rue.
Wishing to engage with their neighbours.
Qui souhaite échanger avec ses voisins.
And finding between 6 and 10 neighbours that are prepared to meet regularly and work through a workbook that Transition has created. And it's a way for people to invite their neighbours into some of the issues that we're looking at around energy, food, transport, and so on. And so far we have 63 groups involving over 550 households. And each of those households has saved on average £570 off their household bills.
Économiser à peu près 570 livres de leur facture régulière et 1,2 tonnes de carbone.
But interestingly, that's not what anybody talks about when you interview somebody from Transition Streets. What they talk about is the sense of community that they now feel exists within their streets. And I was involved in a transition street, and one of my neighbours who I met as a result of that said to me that she'd lived on that street for 25 years and she didn't recognise a single person sitting around the kitchen table on our first meeting. And that I think really sums up what's happened to our communities. And although the actual transition programme has now finished, many projects continue. And projects have grown out of this initial project. So we now have a community cinema.
Nous avons maintenant un cinéma communautaire.
There's a community orchard.
Un jardin communautaire.
We've got electric bikes, which many of the transition street groups use. Community electric bikes.
Oui, les vélos électriques que la communauté utilise pour faire ce travail.
And we did get quite a lot of funding to help make this project
Nous avons eu
happen.
pas mal de financement pour aider ce projet.
This is the transition group that I was, street group
C'est
that I was
le
involved
transition
in.
avec lequel j'ai participé.
And that funding also paid for
On a également payé
subsidizing people to install photovoltaic
l'installation
panels.
de panneaux photovoltaïques.
They had to prove first that they'd done as much draft proofing and reducing their fuel and energy use as much as possible,
Et de baisser leur utilisation de l'énergie.
and then became eligible for subsidized photovoltaic panels.
Une subvention pour l'achat de ces panneaux photovoltaïques.
We also received some funding
On a également
for
reçu un peu de
putting
financement
photovoltaics on the civic hall.
pour installer ces panneaux sur la mairie.
And in England, the government pays for energy production through small-scale renewables.
Et pour les produits renouvelables.
So this money comes into Transition Town Totnes and allows us to achieve other local community projects.
Ça nous permet de réaliser d'autres projets communautaires.
One of which was to refurbish this very old but beautiful drafty village hall.
C'est très vieille mairie, qui manque d'isolation.
And so we insulated this building
Nous avons
and draft proofed it,
l'isolation,
and then we had a grand opening.
c'est la grande ouverture.
So the next series of projects that I want to talk about are all food related.
Suivant, tout ça lien avec l'alimentation.
And this is my passion. This is where the work that I'm involved in. And food, I think most transition groups find that when they're starting up, having food as a focus is the way to the majority of people's hearts,
C'est comme ça qu'on trouve le chemin.
because everybody needs food.
Parce que tout le monde en a besoin.
And there's no better way of sharing than over some good food.
Pendant un repas.
And you're much better in France at doing this than we are.
Et vous faites beaucoup mieux que nous en Angleterre.
So one of our first projects
Premier projet
is called Garden Share.
s'appelle la Garden Share, partage des jardins.
And the idea was that those who live in Totnes and have
L'idée, c'est que ces
gardens,
personnes qui habitent à
but for
Totnes,
various reasons don't manage to do any gardening,
qui n'arrivent pas à faire
perhaps because they're elderly or infirm or just too busy,
très âgés ou trop occupés avec le travail,
that they make their gardens available to those that would love to grow food.
qui proposent l'utilisation de leur jardin au public qui souhaite peut-être les utiliser.
And in exchange for doing that, they would give some produce to the garden owner. But it's very much a project that can run by itself, and it's down to the individuals to arrange access and exactly what the terms of the agreement are. But it's a really nice way of bringing gardens back into productivity. This is a similar project, but taking the concept out into public spaces. So Incredible Edible plants edible food around public spaces. So I think we're very used to having our local council taking care of our roundabouts, our hedgerows, and public spaces around towns. But they tend to be very sterile environments that the public don't really engage with, other than perhaps to walk their dog or to run through. So by planting up beds with edible food and telling people what it is that's growing and inviting them to pick the food and eat it, it's a form of, I think it's quite a strong revolutionary statement to encourage people to walk past and eat the food and pick the food.
De manger ces plantes.
And it's created some amazing little stories with people trying to understand that this is their space, this is their place, that they are, that this is for them. And another project that's based on this is the Fruit and Nut Tree project. So again, we've planted fruit and nut trees around the parks and public places around Totnes. And the idea is that the general public can harvest those. But a really key part of the project is that the local community are responsible for those trees. That they are caring for them, that they are looking after them, as well as reaping the benefits and harvest from them. So another food-related project is run by all women. Is the Seedy Sisters, and they collect seed and redistribute seed and small plants and teach about seed saving. This is an interesting project, which was a short-lived, intense project that came out of a perceived threat of a large corporate coffee cafe wanting to come into the town. And Totnes is fairly unique in England in that it has a very independent high street. We don't have any chain coffee shops in Totnes. And so when we heard that this company wanted to come into Totnes, we decided to celebrate the coffee shops that we already have in the town. And so this was encouraging the cafes to really up their game. And to really celebrate themselves and to demonstrate to the public that they make great coffee. So it's you may think at first that this isn't directly obviously a transition project because coffee isn't local. But actually the concepts around this of that the local cafes support local people who work there, local cleaners, local bakers and artisans, that they support local IT companies, local electrical companies. This means that the money stays in the economy. If Starbucks came to Totnes, none of that stays local apart from the people employed. All of those services are centralised, and if I was a baker, I could not go to Starbucks and say, would you sell my sandwiches? Because it's all centralised. So the impact on the community if a chain came into the town is huge. And the other aspects are that these companies don't have any loyalty to the local community. So it felt, although it's based on coffee, it felt fundamentally important that we campaign against it, but we wanted to campaign in a very positive way.
positive.
So instead of saying no, we wanted
Plutôt que
to
de dire
say
non,
yes,
nous
and we were
oui.
saying yes
Disons
to
oui
our strong, independent high street,
à notre rue principale indépendante,
and yes to quality coffee outlets
au café
that
de
are
qualité,
independent.
qui existe déjà, qui est indépendant.
And we were successful. They stayed away.
Et ils ont réussi, ils ne sont pas venus.
So this was us gathering signatures,
Voilà,
very
en train
English
de
style,
ramasser des signatures.
in the
C'est très
market
anglais.
to discourage this company from coming.
Les entreprises pour empêcher les entreprises de venir.
And as a result of that project, some people said to us, but the cafes aren't open really, really early in the morning or late at night, or there's nowhere for young people to just hang out. So we created this map to show people exactly where all of the cafes are, and we discovered that there are 42 places you could drink a cup of coffee in Totnes. It's a very small town, we've only got 8,000 people, so it's a lot of coffee. And so, yeah, this was a map that we encouraged all of the cafes to contribute a little bit of money to, so that we could promote them, and not just cafes, but the restaurants and pubs as well. And so this is a lot of our work is about supporting the local infrastructure that exists. And a piece of research that was done in Totnes was to look at the complex food webs that exist.
Chercher sur le réseau alimentaire compliqué qui existe à Totnes.
So looking at how, if you take an item of food, who is involved in that piece of food, and how long does it stay local?
Et jusqu'à quel moment est-ce que ça demeure local?
So, for example, a group of volunteers got together and we interviewed everybody involved in the local food chain. So, if you take a sausage, we would interview the people who were eating these sausages. We would interview the shop that was selling these sausages. We would interview the farmer that was growing the pigs that ended up in the sausages. We would interview the farmers that were growing the food to feed the pigs. We interviewed the abattoirs. And the idea was to see how much of that happened within a 30-mile distance of Totnes.
Cette partie de ce travail s'effectue dans un rayon de 30 000 autour de Totnes.
And generally what we found is that when you look at the feed that was going into the pigs in this case, at that point you would be 30 miles out, you would be more than 30 miles out of Totnes. But Totnes is quite unusual. This research was done in 16 towns around England.
16 villes autour d'Angleterre.
And for some of those towns,
Pour certaines de ces villes,
the very first stages would have been outside
les
30
étapes,
miles.
les premières phases auraient été hors de ce rayon.
So for Totnes, this is what 30-mile radius looks like, this big red ring.
De 50 km.
And you can see that about 50% of our area is actually in the sea.
Zone est inclus dans cette zone.
So this reduces the amount of land that we have available for food growing.
L'aire de terre que nous avons disponible pour produire de la nourriture.
The other interesting thing to look at is the big green bit is Dartmoor National Park.
La grande partie verte, c'est le parc national de Strasbourg.
And this is very high land, which means that we can't grow much food on it.
C'est-à-dire nous ne pouvons pas récolter beaucoup de nourriture.
Apart from a lot of beef and lamb. So when you look at the concentric rings, you can actually see that most of our food our local food is sourced within 10 miles
Et
of
local, dans
about
un rayon
7
de
kilometers
10 000,
of
à peu près
Totnes.
7 km de Totnes.
And what this report did for us was provide some really useful information as to what are the challenges to local food.
Quels autres challenges se présentent pour l'alimentation locale?
And out of that piece of work developed
En dehors de ce travail,
a job for me.
ça a créé un emploi pour moi.
So Food Link was born.
Food Link, le lien alimentaire.
And essentially we looked at the challenges. We pulled together local restaurants, local producers, local shops, in order to really get a clear idea as to what stops us from having more local food in the town. And these are a couple of our events that we ran. So we were exploring how do we get people back onto the land and growing food?
Comment convaincre les gens de se mettre sur cette terre locale?
How do we educate people about local food?
Comment éduquer les gens sur la nourriture?
How do we encourage people to start cooking again?
Comment encourager les gens à cuisiner?
How are we going to deal with the huge amounts of food waste that are currently
Comment
happening?
s'occuper des gros déchets alimentaires qui se produisent tous les jours?
How do we create an understanding of what local food is and seasonality and when food is available? And what are the gaps in our local food provision?
Quels sont les trous si on dans la chaîne logistique locale?
So if we were to eat a diet of purely local food, and we took the definition of local to be 30 kilometers, or 23, so 30 miles, about 23 kilometers. What would you be eating? What would you be eating in Brest if that's all you ate? For Totnes, it meant that you were eating a lot of meat and a lot of dairy, and not a lot else. And neither of these things are good for the climate, the earth, or our archeries, or for health. So when we gather together, we try to always serve great food.
Nous essayons toujours de servir de la bonne nourriture.
It's a key part of our work.
C'est une partie clé de notre travail.
And this slide you've seen before, but this is where I wanted to talk just a little bit more about the food aspect of the local economic blueprint.
Du plan économique local.
For example, in Totnes we spend, this piece of research showed us that we spend £30 million every year on food. And 22 million of that goes to our two supermarkets. So although we have probably one of the best high streets in England with independent shops, the independent shops are still only taking 8 million of that total. And so the opportunity is huge. And that's what the work that I'm now doing is looking at this, is how could we shift just 10% of our spend from the supermarket to local suppliers. That would amount to 2 million a year. And as I was saying around the coffee scene, if that money is spent with local producers and local shops, then that money keeps circulating and staying local. We call this the multiplier effect.
Nous appelons ça l'effet multiplicateur.
And that is worth 2.5 times. So for every euro you spend,
pour chaque euro qu'on dépense,
if you spend it in a local shop
Si on dépense dans une
on
boutique locale,
local produce,
produit
it will
locaux,
actually be worth 2.5
ça vaut
euros.
2,5 fois plus.
Okay. So the other thing that this piece of research
Alors,
showed was
cette recherche
that
nous a également
3
dit que
times the number of jobs are supported in independent
Les
shops,
commerces indépendants
stores,
proposent 3 fois plus d'emplois que les supermarchés principaux
than with supermarkets.
pour les mêmes dépenses.
And another project that I'm now involved in
Le projet auquel je participe
is
aujourd'hui
called Grown in Totnes.
s'appelle Grown in Totnes.
And this is looking at what are the gaps in local food provision.
Les trous dans la chaîne logistique alimentaire locale.
And essentially, as I said before, because we're mainly sourcing just meat and dairy produce locally,
Comme on ne produit que des produits de viande et des produits laitiers localement,
there's a real need to expand this to other produce, and I'm particularly interested in grains and pulses, legumes, because these we can store. They are highly nutritious, and they're dried, so they're non-perishable in the short term. So, very briefly, this is just to illustrate that if you are to grow something and feed it to a human being, it is a much more efficient way of feeding people than growing something, feeding it to an animal, and then feeding it to a human being. And so the vision for Grown in Totnes is that we will grow and process local grains and legumes, and then sell them, so that all aspects stay within 30 miles. And in this way, we're benefiting local farmers, we're creating processing skills, we're increasing our food security, and bringing people back, importantly, into relationship with the land and where their food comes from.
Et les personnes reviennent en contact avec les sources de leur nourriture, comprendre tout ça bien.
So this is, we're starting in the very first year with oats.
Nous avons commencé la première année avec l'avoine.
And we eat a lot of oats in the UK.
On mange beaucoup d'avoine.
So this slide just briefly illustrates the different stages of processing that's required.
Les différentes étapes de transformation qui sont exigées pour créer ce produit.
So the top left shows you oats which has an outside inedible husk on.
L'avoine avec sa coque incomestible, immangeable.
On the top right shows you the husk that we've removed.
On voit les coques qu'on a enlevées.
And then in the middle, you're left with the whole grain,
Nous avons la graine
which is now edible.
La graine complète qui est maintenant comestible.
And it makes a great substitute for rice when it's like this.
Facilement pour le riz.
And then the bottom left shows you coarsely ground, and this we turn into porridge, which is a native dish to Scotland. And on the bottom right, we have flour. So the idea is that we do all of this within 30 miles of Totnes. And we've just received a lot of funding to help make this happen. Okay, so I think it's enough of me chatting, and an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you have about Transition Town Totnes. Thank you.
Merci.
Any questions?
Est-ce que vous avez une monnaie locale? À Brest, on a une monnaie locale pour favoriser justement les échanges de produits. produits régionaux. Et c'est quelque chose de plus simple que ça, d'utiliser ça sur Totnes.
So the local currency has been going for about 7 years, and the translator's still there.
Can you hear it? Est-ce que vous entendez là?
Can you hear me? Okay, so the local currency has been going for about 7 years. We can't hear you.
Is it okay?
That's okay.
Ah, ok. Bon, donc la devise locale existe depuis à peu près 7 ans.
And
Et
it started off with just
ça a commencé
£1 notes.
avec des billets du livre.
And then 2 years ago we
Ensuite, il y a 2 ans,
relaunched the
nous avons relancé le
project.
projet.
And we now have £1
Et
notes,
nous avons maintenant des billets d'une livre,
£5
de
notes,
5 livres,
£10 notes,
10 livres
and £21 notes.
et de 21 livres.
And we have also gone
Nous avons
electronic,
également, on est passé à l'électronique
so that people can pay
pour que
with their
les
mobile
gens
phones.
puissent payer avec le portable.
And there are, I think, 4 or 5
Et je
local
crois qu'il
currencies,
existe 4 ou 5 devises locales en
local
concession
currencies around the UK.
Autour du Royaume-Uni.
And the most comprehensive one is in Bristol,
Dont le plus compréhensif se trouve à Bristol
and Brixham in London too.
et à Brixton et Londres aussi.
And I think our biggest problem
Je crois que
in
le
Totnes
plus
is
gros
that
problème à Totnes,
there's something about appropriate size of local
c'est
currencies.
que c'est la taille ou l'échelle de cette devise locale.
And because Totnes is small, there
Parce
is
que
a
Totnes est
limit to how much
petite,
trading
limite pour,
we can do within Totnes, particularly
dans Totnes.
outside of food. Food is easier to
Bon,
achieve,
l'alimentaire,
clothing,
c'est facile à atteindre.
IT, electronics,
Informatique,
that money is
électronique,
being,
cet argent,
it's very hard to
Cet
keep
argent.
it local. So there is
C'est
some
assez
talk
difficile.
about whether we should actually increase the size of the Totnes pound to
nous
perhaps
devrions élargir le
Southwest
rayon
or
de la devise de Totnes.
or our local council restricted area, just
notre
just to
aire
try
locale,
and
communauté locale.
create more
Pour essayer de
momentum.
créer plus de vitesse pour accélérer.
But the majority of our independent shops have signed up
La
and will
plupart
accept
des boutiques
Totnes
indépendantes
pounds.
se sont inscrits dans ce projet pour la livre de Totnes.
The problem is with the electronic, and some of the food shops are less
Et certaines épiceries
happy to take
sont
the
moins
electronic
prêtes
version because they have to pay a bank transfer
parce qu'ils doivent payer
fee
des
of
virements
about, I
bancaires
think
à chaque
it's,
fois,
I'm not sure, 1 to 2%.
contre les 2%.
And so this has put some of them off doing that.
Ça a découragé certaines de ces épiceries.
Until we actually have the food shops on board,
Une fois qu'on aura toutes les boutiques, toutes ces épiceries prêtes à participer,
I think it's a little bit weak
c'est un peu faible.
because that's where people do their daily shopping,
C'est là que les gens font la plupart de leurs courses.
rather than in the gift shops. We've got a lot of tourist gifty shops in Totnes, and many of those will take it because their goods are more expensive, so they can see that 1 to 2% is worth their while.
Et donc ce 1 ou 2%, ça vaut leur temps.
But I think the most
Et je trouve que
useful aspect of
l'aspect le plus utile
these local currencies
de ces devises locales,
is more to just create a conversation
c'est plus
and to
pour
get people
créer
thinking
une
about the
conversation,
issues of local money,
encourager les gens
keeping
à
money
penser,
local.
réfléchir sur l'argent.
Okay,
D'accord?
thank you.
Merci.
Anybody else?
Il y en a d'autres?
Thanks very much for this very interesting talk you just given. Et bravo pour la traduction en temps réel, assez fidèle. I have a question about, have you seen any other side effects to Totnes, like lower crime rates, less graffiti? Have you had any spill-on effects from this transition movement, which seems to be a fantastically community federating project or multiple projects that you've done?
Of the things that I know of, I mean,
Par rapport aux choses que je connais,
there's always a balance when we're doing so many practical projects as to how much we spend time researching what we've done and how successful we've been. And when you've got, you're surviving on volunteers, it's a definite balance. But a couple of things that I know are reasonably well documented is the amount of tourism has gone up as a result of transition. And it was partly the reason that the transition network was set up. So within Totnes we have Transition Town Totnes, and we also have the transition network. And the transition network is there as a resource to support other groups setting up around the world. But in the early days, we were being inundated by transition pilgrims, as we call them. People coming to Totnes to find out about transition. And those of us in doing practical projects on the ground just couldn't offer that level of support that was needed and achieve everything that we were trying to achieve within the town. So the network was born, and we also have a member of staff who runs something called transition tours. And so he will do a tour of the town, and that's open to local people and people who are visiting to really see Totnes in context and to see some of these projects that we've talked about. There's some of these are really not very visible. I mean, you can see photovoltaic panels everywhere around the town, but I remember hearing about a German who visited the town, and he was utterly disappointed that we still had cars going up and down our high street and didn't have goats and horses. So if you come to Totnes, you won't necessarily immediately notice that we are a transition town, because a lot of these projects, like Transition Homes and the Atmos project, they're very much in their embryonic stages, and a lot of work has gone behind the scenes. And hopefully, if you visited in 2 years' time, there'll be some really exciting things to show. So I think tourist numbers have definitely increased, and then I'd say a negative side is that house prices have also increased. Because a lot, Totnes is a very, very desirable place to live. It has already, before before transition came along, it has some of the lowest wages and highest house prices. And there's definitely always been a bit of a move from people who've made money in the city to retire to somewhere like Totnes. And I think almost undoubtedly transition has played a part in that. I meet a lot of people who say that they want to come and live in Totnes and they've heard about the transition movement. So there's two, one negative and one positive.
So I noticed earlier on about your housing, that you had a policy where you would only offer affordable housing to people that have been in Totnes for 3 years or so. Is this to try and counteract the bourbonification or the gentrification that you're experiencing?
Yeah, exactly that. So those houses are for instance, for the young people who just cannot get onto the property ladder, who cannot stay in the area. So it's to really create facilities for people to be able to stay in this town that are doing. I think one of the other criteria which I didn't show is that ideally their jobs would be kind of service jobs. So they're either involved in the environmental movement or they're nurses and on low wages but doing vital service-related jobs.
Je suis membre du collectif brestois de transition citoyenne. Donc, bien sûr, l'expérience de Totnes nous intéresse beaucoup. J'ai une question à vous poser sur l'articulation entre les initiatives citoyennes et la municipalité de Totnes, qui est l'institution.
So our local town council, we have different layers of local government.
Différents niveaux de gouvernement local.
About 4 years ago, our local town council decided that they were going to become a transition town council.
Un conseil de ville en transition.
And so we have a good relationship with our town council, and increasingly a good relationship with our county council. So we have town, county, and then district.
Conseil de ville, conseil de comté et conseil de district.
The bit that we're struggling with most is probably our district council. And they are responsible for planning decisions. And although Totnes votes green,
Totnes vote pour les verts dans les élections.
But the local district area is heavily conservative.
La locale du district est plutôt conservateur.
With a very rich farming community.
Une communauté de cultivation très riche.
And many of them sit on the local district council.
Et donc beaucoup qui servent dans le conseil du district.
So they have been very active in going against requests for wind turbines. And we don't know what's going to happen with transition homes. It doesn't quite fit in with what they don't like the fact that we're using compost toilets. They don't like the fact that we're not using mains water and so on. And then on the county level, we seem to have an increasingly good relationship with them. And they've been supporting us through the Economy Centre. And through other buildings in the town, because of austerity measures and increasing cuts, they're starting to look to us as more of a solution for bringing the community together much more effectively than they ever can, and for delivering services that they're increasingly cutting. So they're a little bit more visionary on the county level than the slightly parochial district council. Does that answer your question?